Amid a raging war in the Middle East, a defense agreement has been signed between Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. Pakistan's foreign ministry says it's intended to strengthen collective deterrence against any act of aggression. CBS News senior foreign correspondent MTS Tayyab has more on what this means.
On August 7th, 2026, in the city of Mecca, the leaders of three of the world's most strategically significant Muslim-majority nations signed a document that will reshape the security architecture of the Middle East. Turkish President Erdogan, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif put their names to what is officially called the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement. The core of it is a collective defense clause. An attack on one is an attack on all, modeled on the same principle that has held NATO together since 1949. It is not NATO. The agreement does not create a permanent military command structure, does not establish shared intelligence protocols of the kind NATO maintains, and does not carry the treaty obligations that come with membership in a formal multinational alliance. But the structural logic is identical, and the combination of capabilities it represents is unlike anything the region has seen before. To understand why this agreement exists, why it exists now, and what it means for every other actor in the region, you have to start with what each of these three countries actually brings to the table, and what each of them is afraid of.
Well, look, this is probably one of the most consequential security realignments that we're seeing in the Middle East. The idea that Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan not only have a security pact with each other, but in it they also have something that's sort of being described as a NATO-style agreement, which is an attack on one is an attack on all.
The reason analysts are calling this consequential rather than ceremonial comes down to what each signatory contributes. Pakistan is the world's only nuclear-armed Muslim-majority nation. It maintains an estimated 170 nuclear warheads, a sophisticated ballistic missile program, and one of the largest standing armies in the world, over 650,000 active personnel. Pakistani officials have been explicit that the agreement does not include a formal nuclear umbrella, meaning Saudi Arabia cannot automatically call on Pakistan's nuclear deterrent the way a NATO ally can rely on the U.S. nuclear guarantee. But the nuclear reality exists regardless of the legal framing. The presence of a nuclear-armed Pakistan inside a mutual defense framework changes threat calculations for every country considering action against the other members. Saudi Arabia brings something different. It is the world's largest oil exporter, the custodian of Islam's two holiest sites, Mecca and Medina, and, as of 2025, the host of a U.S.-facilitated civilian nuclear program that remains in its early stages. Saudi financial resources are not just economic instruments, they are force multipliers. The kingdom has funded Pakistani military infrastructure for decades, and that financial relationship deepens under the new framework. Then there is Turkey, NATO's second-largest military, a country that still hosts American nuclear weapons under NATO's nuclear sharing arrangement, and increasingly, a global arms manufacturer. Turkish-made Bayraktar drones reshaped the battlefield calculus in Ukraine, Libya, and the Caucasus. Turkey's defense industry has become a serious competitor in markets where American and European manufacturers once held monopolies. Put those three together, and you have a combined deterrent that is simultaneously nuclear, financial, and conventionally lethal in ways that no single actor in the region can easily dismiss.
Well, when it comes to Pakistan, Pakistan is the only Muslim-majority country which has a nuclear arsenal. Saudi Arabia, of course, has very deep pockets. And when it comes to Turkey, Turkey not only has a lot of diplomacy, given its own connections and partnership with NATO, Europe, the US as well, but more importantly, Turkey is emerging as a major manufacturer of arms.
What makes the timing of this agreement particularly significant is the role the United States is playing, not as a participant, but as the absence that made it necessary. For decades, Saudi Arabia's security rested on an implicit bargain with Washington. Oil flows freely, the dollar remains the currency of global oil markets, and the United States provides the security guarantees that protect the Gulf. That arrangement, which analysts called the petrodollar system, has been quietly eroding. The Trump administration accelerated that erosion deliberately. President Trump's public posture has been consistent. The United States will sell weapons to Middle Eastern allies, but it will not function as their security guarantor. American taxpayers, in Trump's framing, should not bear the cost of defending wealthy countries that can afford to defend themselves. The result is a security vacuum that this pact is explicitly designed to fill. The Mecca Agreement did not emerge in isolation. It builds directly on a bilateral Saudi-Pakistan defense pact signed in September 2025, which itself emerged in the context of mounting regional instability tied to the ongoing conflict involving Iran. As U.S.-Iran tensions escalated and American military posture in the region remained deliberately ambiguous, Gulf states began hedging. Saudi Arabia is not abandoning its relationship with Washington. It is building redundancy. It is constructing a security architecture that does not depend entirely on a single patron whose reliability it increasingly questions. The fact that none of this is happening without Washington's tacit approval, as Tayeb notes, makes the irony complete. The United States is blessing an arrangement that further diminishes the need for American military presence in the region it has spent decades attempting to manage.
Now, to be clear, none of this would be happening without the tacit approval of the Trump administration. President Trump has made it clear that while he's quite happy to sell weaponry to these countries, he really wants to shrink the U.S.'s footprint in this region, and more importantly, he really wants to shrink this idea that the U.S. is responsible for the security of other countries. And I think this is a really big signal that that is happening in real time.
For India, the calculus is straightforward and alarming. India and Pakistan fought a brief but intense military confrontation in May 2025, the second Balakot crisis, which ended without nuclear escalation, but deepened the bilateral hostility that has defined South Asian security for 7 decades. Pakistan now enters a collective defense agreement with 2 major regional powers, both of which have their own reasons to maintain cordial relations with New Delhi, but neither of which is a natural Indian ally. Turkey has been openly critical of India on the Kashmir issue and has maintained vocal support for Pakistan's position in international forums. Saudi Arabia has worked to balance its relationships with both countries, given that millions of Pakistani and Indian workers form the backbone of the Gulf labor force. But Saudi Arabia's entry into a formal mutual defense pact with Pakistan shifts that balance. India must now calculate that any future military confrontation with Pakistan, however limited in scope, could draw in a coalition that includes Turkey's conventional military capability and Saudi Arabia's financial resources. That is a fundamentally different deterrence environment than the one India has operated in for the past several decades. India has not publicly responded to the agreement with alarm. New Delhi's diplomatic posture tends toward restraint in public statements. But the strategic community in India is not restrained. The pact is being read in New Delhi as precisely what it appears to be: a formalization of Pakistan's strategic depth, supported by 2 of the most capable regional powers outside of Iran.
Now, having said that, there are other countries in the region who are probably not going to be happy about this. Iran, of course, is one of them. But when it comes to Pakistan, that would be India. India and Pakistan, of course, have a notoriously bitter rivalry. They fought a war just 18 months ago. And so the security pact will certainly be concerning for them.
For Israel, the implications are more complex and potentially more consequential in the long term. Israel's primary strategic objective in the region for the past several years has been normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia, building on the Abraham Accords framework that normalized ties with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. A Saudi-Israeli normalization would have been the crown achievement of that process, the custodian of Islam's holiest cities formally recognizing the Jewish state. That process is not dead, but the Mecca Agreement makes it significantly more complicated. Saudi Arabia has now signed a mutual defense pact with Turkey, a country that has become one of Israel's most vocal adversaries since the Gaza war began in October 2023. Turkish President Erdogan severed trade relations with Israel, recalled his ambassador, and has been among the loudest international critics of Israeli military operations. For Saudi Arabia to enter a formal security framework with Turkey while simultaneously pursuing normalization with Israel, creates a structural contradiction that Riyadh will have to manage carefully. The pact also highlights the degree to which the Gaza conflict has reshuffled the regional architecture. Saudi Arabia, which was moving toward pragmatic engagement with Israel before October 7th, has found itself in an increasingly uncomfortable position between its desire for regional stability and normalization on one hand, and the domestic and international political costs of being seen as accommodating Israel during an ongoing conflict on the other. The Mecca Agreement does not close the door on Saudi-Israeli normalization permanently, but it raises the price of that normalization substantially, and it signals to Jerusalem that Riyadh is building alternatives.
But it's also likely to concern Israel as well. Turkey and Israel have become pretty bitter adversaries in the fallout of the Gaza war. And so for this pact to now have emerged between, again, Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia at a time when Israel really wants to normalize with Saudi Arabia, I think that's certainly raising some alarm bells in Tel Aviv.
Step back and look at the full picture. What the Mecca Agreement represents is not simply a defense pact between three countries. It is the formalization of a shift that has been underway since at least 2023, the gradual erosion of the post-Cold War security order in the Middle East, in which the United States served as the ultimate guarantor of Gulf security, and Israel served as the region's dominant military power.
This is no ordinary
Both of those anchors
together.
are being tested
It is a seismic
simultaneously.
shift in the security
American
architecture
security
of the Middle
guarantees
East.
are becoming
In
conditional
Mecca, in Saudi
and
Arabia,
commercially
Crown Prince
transactional
Mohammed bin
rather
Salman
than
invited
unconditional
Turkish
and
President Recep Tayyip
alliance-based.
Erdogan and Pakistani
Israeli
Prime
military
Minister Shehbaz
supremacy,
Sharif and
while
his
still
military
formidable,
chief Asim
has been
Munir
complicated
to
by
sign
the
a
sustained
defense
costs of the Gaza and
It's something
Lebanon
the region
campaigns,
hasn't witnessed
and by the
in
growing
decades.
sophistication
Putting
of
three the
adversary
largest Muslim
capabilities.
majority countries together
Into
onto a
that
roadmap
vacuum,
for joint
the
peace
Mecca Agreement
and
steps.
intelligence sharing.
It does not replace the old order.
In a
It
joint
could not.
statement, they said this agreement
Pakistan's
reflects
nuclear
the three
weapons do
countries'
not
commitment to
directly protect
strengthening their
Riyadh the way
collective
American
security
forces
and
stationed in
achieving
the
peace,
Gulf do.
security, and stability in
Turkey's
the region
arms
and the
industry
world,
does not produce
striving
aircraft
for a
carrier
secure
battle
and
groups.
prosperous future.
Saudi money is a
The
powerful
agreement aims
instrument,
to enhance
but it
joint
is not a
deterrence
substitute
against
for
any
integrated
aggression
military
and
command.
stipulates that any
What the
armed
agreement
attack on
does
any
is
of the three
create a new
countries
layer of
is
strategic
considered an
complexity.
attack on all three.
It signals to Iran
The core
that
of
any
this agreement
escalation
mirrors
against the
NATO's
three
Article
signatories
5,
will be
which
met
requires
not by
the
a
alliance
single
to respond
state,
to an attack
but by a
on any
coalition.
member. Any
It
attack
signals to
against
India
Saudi
that
Arabia,
Pakistan's
Turkey, or
strategic
Pakistan
environment has
is now
materially
officially considered
improved.
an attack
It
against
signals
them
to
all.
Israel that Saudi
Each of these
Arabia is
countries
building
brings
options
unique
rather than
capabilities.
betting everything on normalization.
Pakistan's battle-hardened
And it
military,
signals to
its
Washington
munitions,
that
and
even its
nuclear
most
arsenal,
loyal
the
Gulf
only
partner
one in a
is
Muslim
no
majority
longer
nation.
willing to wait passively
Turkey,
for
a vital
American
NATO
protection
member, brings
that may or
world-class
may
drone
not
technology
materialize.
and sophisticated
The
defense
Middle East has spent the past
And Saudi
century
Arabia
being
provides
shaped by
the financial
decisions made
muscle
in
to
Washington,
back it all up.
Moscow, and
Regional
European
leaders say
capitals.
the agreement is a
The
matter
Mecca
of
Agreement
necessity,
is a signal,
not just willingness.
still early,
In the
still
wake of the
uncertain in its
Iran-US
real-world
war, the stark
implications,
reality set in
that the
across
countries
Gulf,
of the region are
Washington's
beginning to
security
shape it
guarantees
themselves.
did not match the defense shields
What
it
that
has given to
ultimately
Israel.
means for stability,
Riyadh,
for
Ankara,
nuclear
and Islamabad
proliferation
have
risks,
been rethinking
for the future of
everything,
the Abraham
from energy
Accords,
security
and for
manpower
American
to
strategic
independent
interests in the
defense
region,
manufacturing.
no one yet
For all
knows
three
with
states,
confidence.
Israel remains the biggest
But the
threat to
direction is
regional
clear.
security and stability.
What would you have thought watching that signing in Mecca?
Iran